Good evening, I'm Andrea Mulrine. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County, and I want to thank you for joining us here this evening for the debate with the Democratic candidates for the 113th Legislative District of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'd first like to extend my thanks to the University of Scranton for allowing us the use of this facility, to the College Democrats for their help with our events throughout the year, and to ECTV for taping this event, and then they will be broadcasting it on ECTV and making it available to us to upload to the League's website. So you'll be able to see the debate on lwvlackawanna.org as well. It will be posted later this week. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that encourages the informed and active participation in government and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We do not support nor oppose any political party or candidate. We ask you to join the League if this is the type of thing that you would like to support. If you are not so inclined to join the League, perhaps you would be willing to make a financial contribution to the League on your way out tonight. We'd appreciate that as well. It helps underwrite the costs, the expenses for these types of things. In many times, many people discount the importance of primary elections. You know, they think, well, it's only the general election that counts. But I have to say that in this primary election, as in other primary elections, there are decisions that will be made. And it's important for all of us to recognize that a lot of these offices are offices that have a great impact on our day-to-day lives. Now, in the presidential race, of course, this year, there is no opponent to Barack Obama on the Democratic ticket, but on the Republican ticket, you will have a choice of 4 candidates. Even though Rick Santorum has pulled out of the race, his name will remain on the, he has, I forget how he termed it now, but his name will remain on the Pennsylvania ballot. So you'll have, as a Republican, you would choose between Newt Gingrich, Mitt Romney, Ron Paul, and Rick Santorum. Also on the ballot this year is United States Senator. On the Democratic ticket, you'll vote in the primary for either Bob Casey or Joseph Vodvarka. And on the Republican ticket for David Christian, Mark Scaringi, Stephen Welch, Tom Smith, or Sam Rohrer. This year, we'll also be voting for the Pennsylvania Attorney General. On the Democratic ticket, you'll have a choice between Kathleen Kane and Patrick Murphy. And on the Republican ticket, David Freed is running unopposed. Also, we'll be voting for Auditor General. On the Republican ticket, there is a race, Frank Pinto and John Maher. And Eugene DePasquale is running unopposed on the Democratic ticket. This year, our representatives in the U.S. Congress have changed because of redistricting in the state of Pennsylvania. And although those of us who live in the city of Scranton used to be part of the 11th Congressional District, we are now part of the 17th Congressional District. In that race, Tim Holden is facing off against Matt Cartwright as the Democratic candidates in the primary, and Laureen Cummings is running unopposed on the Republican ticket. Scranton and Lackawanna County are also covered partially by the 10th Congressional District. Tom Marino is running unopposed on the Republican ticket, and Philip Scolo is running unopposed on the Democratic ticket. These races in particular are important. They're statewide or U.S. races, and I have to say, I was unable to find any debates or coverage on these events on PCN or on WVIA, so I would have to point you to the coverage in the Times-Tribune or on wherever you can find it online. I was unable to find anything for this time around. The League's websites also, we have 2 different websites where you can get voter information. That's either vote411.org or smartvoter.org, so we would invite you to look at those sites as well. In the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, there are 4 districts that are cover Lackawanna County. The 112th district, earlier this evening, we had a debate between the Democratic candidates, Ken Smith and Kevin Haggerty, and there is no Republican candidate in that race. In the 113th, we'll shortly be speaking with Kevin Murphy and Marty Flynn. The 114th is unopposed. Sid Michaels-Kavulich, the incumbent, is running unopposed on the Democratic ticket. And for the 115th district, which was the seat that had been held by Ed Staback for many years, Frank Farina and Randy Castellani are facing off on the Democratic ticket, and Teresa Kane is running unopposed on the Republican ticket. So there are decisions that will be made in this particular election, although it's a primary, and we do ask you to make sure that you get out and vote. So with that, let's turn to the details for our debate this evening. There will be no opening statements from the candidates. And the way that we craft our questions, the League of Women Voters believes that democratic government depends upon the informed and active participation of its citizens. Democratic government requires that governmental bodies protect the citizens' right to know by giving adequate notice of proposed actions, holding open meetings, and making public records accessible. In addition, we believe that responsible government should be responsive to the will of the people. It requires integrity and accountability, and we keep these things in mind as we draft the questions for our debates. The debate will be approximately 60 minutes in length. Both candidates will answer the same set of questions, and no questions or topics were given to either one of them in advance. All questions will have a 2-minute response time. The first candidate to answer the question, we drew a straw before we started. Marty will start with answering the first question, and each candidate will be allowed up to a 1-minute rebuttal, and that's at their choice. As we move through the evening, depending on how many questions we get through, we may suspend rebuttals, but we'll see how it goes. Each candidate is allowed a 2-minute closing statement. So with that, let's get started. And the first question goes to Marty. Marty, what do you bring to the table that your opponent doesn't? Why are you the best candidate?
Well, Andrew, I would have to say, though Mr. Murphy may have more experience in the field that I have to say that I'm going to bring a voice to Harrisburg that isn't being heard. I feel Mr. Murphy and I would vote very similar on a lot of issues, but I definitely believe that I personally would have more of a voice in Harrisburg for the people than he has. I don't feel that the 113th legislative district is a better place in the past 4 years, and I aim to change that.
Thank you. Kevin, the question to you, what do you bring to the table that your opponent doesn't, and why are you the best candidate?
Well, I believe, Andrea, that we've brought a level of constituent service to the 113th district that heretofore hasn't been there. We've done some really different things with regards to our constituent services. We were nationally recognized for having the only legislative drive-through window, not only in Pennsylvania, but in the country, on Nightline. So that was rather exciting. The people that work in my district office, as well as the one legislative aide that I have in Harrisburg, do an outstanding job on a variety of issues. In the brief time I've been in Harrisburg, we've had 13 substantive pieces of legislation passed the General Assembly, and as recently as a month ago, we had Zachary's Law, House Bill 601, passed the General Assembly, and this bill basically holds those who commit heinous crimes, crimes of child abuse that result in the death of the child to a higher standard. The mandatory minimum prior to this piece of legislation being passed overwhelmingly on both sides of the aisle, we had Republican support as well as Democratic support, was as little as 6 years. We significantly increased that, and those that commit crimes against children will be held accountable here in Pennsylvania. So basically, we stand on a record of achievement. We've done a fantastic job in the way we handle our constituents with respect, with dignity, and we help all who come to the door, whether they live in our district or whether they don't, whether they're Republicans, whether they're Democrats, or whether they're independents. So I'm proud to stand on my record. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, you'll respond to this next question first, and I want to talk specifically about voter ID. As you know, Pennsylvania recently passed a law requiring voters to show photo ID in order to vote. If you support this law, what are the facts and evidence pertaining to voter fraud that support your decision? If you are opposed to the new law, please explain how you believe it will disenfranchise voters.
Well, I voted against the voter ID law because I think it's an obvious attempt at trying to suppress the Democratic vote here in Pennsylvania and in other states across the nation. It's an obvious attempt, in my opinion, to drive down the vote and limit the number of Democratic votes that turn out in the November general election. It disenfranchises not only senior citizens, it disenfranchises veterans, it disenfranchises minorities, and it also disenfranchises students, setting the bar higher and making it more difficult for them to participate in our democratic process. It's wrong. I didn't support it. And as recently as today, I heard there was a stay, an injunction on Act 13, which will prevent the administration and Pennsylvania at this point from going forward until it's heard by the state Supreme Court.
Thank you. Marty, the question to you.
I obviously feel that the voter ID bill, I would definitely vote against it also. I feel it's an obvious attempt by the governor and the Republican Party to limit the Democrats' vote. It is an obvious attempt to suppress the elderly from voting and the minority vote in the state of Pennsylvania. The mere fact of getting an ID, you have to ask for a voter ID, and if you don't specifically ask for a voter ID, you're charged, I believe it's $13.50 or $13.75 for an ID. When if you say I need a voter ID, they give you a free ID. To me, it seems like it's an obvious attempt to limit the voter turnout, and especially in these times when voter turnout has been so low, we need to increase our voter turnout, not to lower it. So I'm definitely against the voter ID bill.
Okay, thank you.
Would I have an opportunity to rebut?
You can.
This isn't quite a rebuttal, but it is something I think is poignant, and I think it's something the people of Pennsylvania in the 113th District have to realize. At the same time, the Republican majority in the House, the Senate, and this Republican governor claim that they wanted to be frugal because these are very austere times. This bill, this legislation will cost Pennsylvanians over $11 million to implement. At a time when we're cutting back on senior programs, we're cutting back on education, higher education, we're compromising pre-K programs, and there's the possibility exists that we're going to go back to half-day kindergarten here within the 113th District after 20 years is completely unacceptable, and I think the money could be invested much better elsewhere.
Marty, did you have anything else to add?
No.
Okay, let's move on then. This next question pertains to public pension funds. Benefits, underfunding from the state, and worse than expected investment returns have pushed the state's two large public pension funds into multi-billion-dollar holes. According to a recent article in the Pennsylvania Independent, Pennsylvania's two public pension systems have a combined unfunded liability of about $37 billion, but because of the way the liability is calculated, the actual amount to be paid in coming years possibly exceeds $50 billion. Do you agree with this assessment? What are the solutions to this issue? And Marty, you would respond first.
I agree with the assessment. I believe that without federal intervention, it's going to be very hard to patch that hole. You know, profits from Marcellus Shale and casino revenue aren't going to patch a $60 billion hole in a pension plan. I believe that we're going to need federal income to help this burden in the pension system. We were spending $50 billion a month in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think this is something that, since that's surpassed, that maybe the federal government could step in and help with.
Okay, Kevin, the question to you.
Well, do I agree with the numbers? I agree with the numbers today, but the market changes on a daily basis. We've taken steps already in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and in the Senate to scale back some of the pensions, some of the years for vesting, and some of the benefits that are derived within that system. So we already have taken steps within the General Assembly to address this problem. But as the market flow changes, and we all have to understand, it wasn't just a Pennsylvania problem, it wasn't just a problem for the United States. This was a global problem. Countries around the world suffered as a result of big businesses, big banks, and speculators on Wall Street doing the wrong things, making a quick buck, and passing the blame onto hard-working Pennsylvanians. It's not really fair. I don't quite agree with their assessment that it's an employee problem. It's a national problem. We have to deal with this national problem on a state level. I have the utmost respect and I have the utmost confidence in our state treasurer, Rob McCord. He's probably the most well-qualified treasurer that we've had in Pennsylvania history. And I think to through time and through some continued changes that are necessary, if the market doesn't rebound and these investments don't improve to sustain itself, we will have to take some further steps.
Thank you. Kevin, you'll respond. Did you want to?
Yes, I'd like to respond to that. We're not talking about a couple $1 million here. We're talking $60 billion, I think you said. I believe without federal intervention, you cannot patch that kind of hole by cutting a little here or cutting a little there. The state budget was $63.4 billion, somewhere around there. That's almost a whole year's budget. I don't see that as possible.
I just have one statement. I'd just like to correct the budget was $27.3 billion, not 60 some odd billion dollars. So it was probably a third of what my opponent estimated our budget to be.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on now. I have an introduction for this next question, and Kevin, you'll respond to it first, and then so I'm going to give you an introduction, and then I'll ask the question. The State Integrity Investigation, a project of the Center for Public Integrity, Global Integrity, and Public Radio International, recently released its state-by-state report card based on analysis of each state's laws and practices that deter corruption and promote accountability and openness. Pennsylvania ranked 18th overall with a grade of C-. So that's setting the stage for where this question is coming from. This question is specifically geared toward the state budget process. Pennsylvania, on this report card, received an F for the state budget process with a 0 score for having a well-resourced fiscal budget office for the nonpartisan analysis of budget proposals. Please explain why you agree or disagree with the grade, and if you agree with the grade, what actions can you take as a legislator to address this? Kevin, the question to you.
Well, I could agree with the grade. I think the grade is fair, but I think we've already taken steps to address that. Last year, we voted to, for the first time, have an independent office of finance in the budget. Years prior to that, you'd have the Republicans or the Democrats, whoever happened to be in the majority, and we're not going to point fingers because it was really done by both parties when they were in their respective majorities. But there wasn't an independent office so that everybody was dealing with the same real numbers. You'd get a number from the majority, the minority would speculate that number to be a lot higher. So I think this levels the playing field. We all know what kind of dollars that we're dealing with, and I think over a period of time, our grade is certainly going to improve. But you have to start somewhere, and I think that was a big first step that we took last legislative session.
Marty, the question to you.
Andrew, could you repeat the question? I feel my opponent got a little far away from that.
Question is, Pennsylvania received an F for the state budget process with a 0 score for having a well-resourced fiscal budget office for the nonpartisan analysis of budget proposals. Please explain why you agree or disagree with the grade, and if you agree, what actions can you take as a legislator to address this?
Andrew, I believe that is a fair assessment of the way things are going in Harrisburg. I believe that the accountability factor needs to trickle down all the way to the state representatives themselves. I think a smaller legislator is very important. We need to cut it in half. Okay, I think that's a big step right there. I also feel that per diem should be wiped out. There should be no free walking money that you don't have to account for and have receipts for. It should be run just like a business. I believe you should turn in your receipts for anything you have. And I believe that will build its way up, and the accountability through all the various lawmakers will push things through to the upper management in the State House.
Okay,
Do I have
thank
an
you.
opportunity to rebut that as well? Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank my opponent for pointing out it is about individual accountability. We made promises when we ran in 2008, before we were elected to the General Assembly. And we have been the most transparent legislative office in probably all of Pennsylvania. We were one of the first, certainly the first in northeastern Pennsylvania, but one of the first in the state of Pennsylvania to post all of our expenses online. whether it's expenses associated with mileage, whether it's expenses associated with hotel stays, whether it's expenses associated with going to committee hearings or a gas wellhead site in Pittsburgh, a corrections hearing in Philadelphia, or wherever we happen to be throughout Pennsylvania doing the people's business. Everything is posted online, and I would be inclined to believe that's probably where my opponent got his numbers.
I would like to,
Okay.
I'd like to say this. If you post everything online, why don't you post receipts for your per diems?
Moving on. The next question is still pertaining to the state integrity investigation. This one pertains to redistricting. And Marty, you will respond to this question first. Not surprisingly, to me at least, given the recent issues pertaining to legislative redistricting, including for the seat that you're running for, Pennsylvania received an F for redistricting. This included a 0 in the category for accepting redistricting plans submitted by the public. Please explain again why you agree or disagree with the grade, and if you agree with the grade, what actions can you take to address this?
I would like to say I definitely probably agree with that. The district does seem gerrymandered in some fashion. As to why it seems that way, it just doesn't seem continuous. You know, there's different spots around Scranton. There's part of Scranton, there's Troop, you know, different parts of South Abington and Clark's Green. It just doesn't seem to conform to one certain area. I don't know why the district is put in effect that way since 2001, but it does seem to me that there are various parts of communities, parts of boroughs, and it doesn't seem to mesh with the city and boroughs. It's very fragmented. And I do believe that it definitely should be redistricted. And as to what plan, I believe a teacher came up with a plan that they're thinking about going with. I'm not familiar with the intricacies of the plan, but I am definitely for the redistricting.
Thank you. Kevin, the question to you, explain why you agree or disagree with the grade, and if you agree, what actions can you take to address this?
Well, I disagree with the grade of an F, because there isn't a grade of F minus. Because if F minus was an option, that's what we would have received as a state. But you have to understand the process as well. And I'd like to just briefly try to explain that to everyone. We have a census that's done every 10 years. Based upon the population shifts in Pennsylvania, we determine who has more population, who has gained, and who has lost. So that's how the basic establishing guideline for redistricting. Also understanding the makeup of the committee. There's 2 Republican members, the leader from the Senate, the Republican leader from the House, the Democratic leader from the House, and the Democratic leader from the Senate. Whoever happens to be in the majority, if the 4 leaders in those caucuses can't agree on the reapportionment maps, then there's a 3rd person chosen, and that 3rd person is chosen by the party that's in the majority, and in this particular instance, that was the Republicans. So they had a retired state Superior Court justice who was appointed. So the balance was in favor of the Republicans by a margin of 3-2. They did the reapportionment once, had to do it over. Did it the second time. There's a 30-day contestation period between the date it's finalized and it's voted on by the reapportionment committee, and then there's 30 days that you have to appeal to the state Supreme Court. In this particular instance, the second reapportionment was appealed to the state Supreme Court, and a majority Republican members of the state Supreme Court threw the reapportionment maps out. So we're in the process of redoing them right now. Those same leaders that I had mentioned earlier are going through that process, and from what I hear, tomorrow we'll have another update and we'll have newer reapportioned maps for the districts of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Did you want to add something,
Yes,
Marty?
Andrea. I think the redistricting is important because there's parts of communities that you're representing, and then there's the same community, another part of it you're not representing. And I think as a representative, you should be part of that community, or at least very close to it. It shouldn't be that far out of reach from you, from where you grew up, from where you were from your whole entire life. You should represent those people, and that's where you should be campaigning from.
Kevin, do you have anything to add?
Well, I do agree with that. Everyone wants to represent an area that they grew up in so they can make a difference in the quality of life for those that they represent. But in this capacity, you're not only making a difference in the quality of life for your neighbors in the town you grew up in, you're making a difference for all Pennsylvanians. You represent one legislative district, and our race, it's the 113th district. But we can't control the maps as they're reapportioned, and that part of it happens to be, unfortunately, out of our control.
Okay, Kevin, the next question will go to you first, and I want to talk about the legislative surplus. Since at least 2008, Ernst & Young, the auditor hired to report on the $189 million plus surplus in the Pennsylvania legislature, has recommended that the legislature consider adopting a policy that establishes and monitors the appropriate amount of surplus. None have been enacted. There is no internal policy that caps the size of the surplus, nor how the money can be spent. In light of this, what actions would you take, if any?
Andrew, 1 second. I just want to point out your screen is showing the 120.
Yeah, but I don't think that Kevin has, or I don't think that Mark has it in the picture. He's got a close-up on them. We'll fix it.
Thank you, Andrew. And it was just pointed out that the screen behind us indicates this is the 112th legislative district, but it is in fact the 113th legislative
That's right.
debate. As far as the surplus, Andrea, the surpluses were originally created for partisan reasons once again. And they were created to give a certain independence as was intended between the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. When you have a governor who's going to hold back staff, hold back monies, keep people from being paid in order to twist arms within the House of Representatives, the General Assembly, and in the Senate, it's just not right. And it's really a safeguard to ensure that the democratic process works itself out without any undue pressure by the governor.
Okay. Marty, the question to you.
Could you repeat it, Andrea?
Since at least 2008, Ernst & Young, the auditor hired to report on the $189 million plus surplus in the Pennsylvania legislature, has recommended that the legislature consider adopting a policy that establishes and monitors the appropriate amount of surplus. None have been enacted. There is no internal policy that caps the size of the surplus, nor how the money can be spent. In light of this, what actions would you take, if any?
Andrea, first off, I believe that pension money should be used to fill spots, and it shouldn't be used. Let me see. I could put this.
And I just want to make one
be
clarification, Marty. It's not pension money, it's legislative surplus, just to be
Okay,
clear.
legislative surplus money should not be invested by the governor himself or the legislation. That money should sit and not be moved at all, I believe.
Okay.
Andrea?
Yes.
Just a brief rebuttal, and to more adequately answer the question, to follow up what I previously stated, I think the proper and appropriate amount would be enough so that the General Assembly and the Senate could maintain their staffs, pay the bills, which they have to pay to keep the process moving along between July 1st, which is the deadline to have a budget, and the end of the year. So I think for a period of at least 5 months, the appropriate money should be in place and all other monies should be returned to the general fund.
Marty, anything to add?
No.
Okay. And let's see if we can get this back. There is no back office to the League of Women Voters, so everything you see happens here. So when there's a mistake, I have to correct it myself. The slide is right now, it's 113th, so I apologize for the confusion. The next question, moving on, Marty, you'll respond to first, and we're moving on to the topic of ethics. Public confidence in our government is eroding given the recent charges and convictions of corruption performed by current or former State House or Senate members, Purcell, Ori, DeWeese, Fumo, Vian, and Mello. How will you change public perception? What actions will you take? Marty, the question to you.
Andrea, I feel integrity is the key there. The candidate has to be consistent with their beliefs and honest with themselves. And through integrity, this is how it's done. When a person believes in themselves and focuses on the job at hand and does what they can for their constituents in a moral and ethical fashion, everyone sees what's going on and knows that that person is a good person, is making an ethical choice. And that's the problem. Things in Harrisburg over the past 5 to 10 years have gotten so out of hand with ethics and monies and per diems. People aren't being accountable for their actions. And when a person has integrity, things fall into place. So, Andrew, I believe integrity is the key there.
Thank you. Kevin, the question to you.
Well, I don't want to avoid the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And we all realize that there's been a lot of problems, far too many problems in Luzerne County and Lackawanna County, and everyone here in this audience and those that are viewing this debate at home understand that. Unfortunately, it's part of the process that has to work itself out. After the grand jury investigations are over, after the trials are over, after the sentencings are over, the people of this district and the people of Pennsylvania will at least be able to have the reassurance of knowing not everyone's doing the wrong thing. So it's unfortunate, but it's necessary part of our democratic process. What we've done down in Harrisburg to try to address some of these problems, we have mandatory ethics training for all of our employees. No one could say that they didn't know. No one could say, well, we always did it this way. Things are different. There is a different day. Things have been done differently down in Harrisburg, and people are being held accountable.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on to the topic of reform, and the first reform that I want to address is a question pertaining to judicial reform. And Kevin, you'll respond to this question first. Do you support changing Pennsylvania's method for selecting judges by election to merit selection? Why or why not?
No, I do not support that, Andrea. And I don't support it because I don't believe we should have appointed judges making decisions that affect outcomes of elections, as we saw when Al Gore and George W. Bush ran. We shouldn't have that. What we should have are judges that are held accountable by voters, because that's the only way that you're really going to have any public trust. And instead of 10-year terms, maybe we should reduce them down to 4 or 5 years like other elected offices. So people could look at their record, look and see if they've been lenient on crime, look and see if they've been lenient on people who commit heinous crimes, and just take a look at their record and elect them on their merits, but let's have the residents and the constituents of Pennsylvania make that decision.
Okay, thank you. Marty, the question to you.
I agree with Kevin. I feel that the constituents of Pennsylvania can elect the proper judge through a fair and equal election. Like Kevin said, the background on every candidate is found easily, and everything comes out in the wash anyway. So a candidate for judge will be elected by the people like they've always been, and I believe that's a great way to do things for judges. You know, it's worked over the years. It's obviously opposite of what Kevin said in his debate in 2010 with Mike LaPola. He actually had the opposite view then, and I'm glad to see that your opinion's changed.
Did you want to?
I have no rebuttal
Okay.
for that, but I do appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. So let's talk now about legislative reform. There were legislative reforms that were recommended by the Bonus Gate grand jury. Two of them were pertaining to reducing the size of the legislature and imposing term limits. So the question goes to you, Marty, and the question is, do you support or oppose reducing the size of the legislature and/or imposing term limits, and why?
Andrea, I support term limits. I believe no longer than 5 terms for House representatives. I believe that public service should have a limit on it. And I also believe that the state house needs to be reduced by probably about half, I would say. I think there's too many state representatives representing the Commonwealth. And I believe starting there is a great idea.
Okay. Kevin, the question to you, please.
Grand jury recommendations are recommendations by people who have been sequestered, who've basically heard one side of the story. They come out with recommendations. Actually, I think we need a review and a new system, the grand jury system, that provides for more transparency. Right now, everything's done behind closed doors. And if a jury only hears one side of the story, of course, they're going to recommend a trial. And, you know, in all fairness to anyone involved, they'll have their day in court. But we've done a lot as far as reform as recently as 2 weeks ago on that topic, because Sam Smith, who happens to be the Republican leader of the House, or not the Republican leader, but the Speaker of the House and the House of Representatives from Puxatawny, he offered legislative reform in the form of reducing the state legislature. I voted for that as recently as a week and a half ago, and that would reduce the number of legislators in Pennsylvania to 150. In addition to that, there was an amendment that we all voted for, and it was approved, that would also reduce the Senate by 12. So we're trying to take steps to reduce the legislature, but what we have to do is we have to pass it through 2 consecutive House sessions and Senate sessions, and we have to put it on a referendum and let the voters of Pennsylvania decide. It's not up to us. It's up to us to give the people the opportunity, and I believe we've already done that. As far as term limits, I think I'm not for term limits, and I'm not for term limits for valid, legitimate reasons. There's too much influence of lobbyists in states that have term limits, because when they know that a legislator is coming up on his limit, they have more influence over what's going on than that particular legislator does. So I don't think you root out corruption by imposing term limits. I think it only adds to the problem. So these are problems that we face. These are problems that we should publicly vet, and we should have these open discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Apparently, my slides have a mind of their own because they've gone back to the 112th. This is our second debate this evening, and apparently we're going back. So I'm just going to leave it turned off for now. Because apparently I can't get it right.
It's not bothering me. I can't see it.
Andrea, I feel on that, the longer a politician is in office and the further along he gets, I think that adds to corruption. Career politicians, I think, add to corruption.
I'd like to rebut that briefly, because I don't think that the same would hold true for any profession. I don't think the longer you're a police officer, the more corrupt or the worse police officer you are. I don't believe if you're an attorney, the longer you're there, the worse you get. And I don't believe if you're a surgeon, the longer you're there, the worse you get. I think the longer you're there, the better you get. There needs to be more public scrutiny, and you have to pay attention. But I certainly don't agree with my opponent with his assessment that the longer you're there, the more corrupt you are. It's just each individual is only responsible for his own behavior, as in any other profession.
Okay, I have one
Andrea,
last question.
I want to rebut that.
I think, where's my keepers? Did we do 2 rebuttals already? We did 2 rebuttals, so we're going to move on. Thank you. I have one last question pertaining to reform, and then we'll move on to some other topics. This one pertaining to election reform. Would you support legislation to allow no-fault absentee voting and to ease the deadlines for returning absentee ballots? And I should say, would you either initiate or support, introduce or support legislation pertaining to absentee voting? And Kevin, you respond first on this one.
Well, I think that question is more along the lines of what we should be looking at trying to do to get more people to participate in this democratic process. This voter ID bill that was voted on a month and a half ago and passed and signed by the governor was a complete sham. Its only purpose, its sole purpose, was to suppress Democratic votes. And that's the ugliest piece of legislation as far as partisanship goes that I've seen since I've been in the General Assembly. What we should be doing, and we're going to need people with the technological expertise to make sure this is done properly, to make sure there's no fraud. I certainly don't have that expertise, but we would have to have some hearings, we would have to investigate it, and we'd have to be able to rely on programs that are tried and proven. We can't just put it out there and open up the potential for more voter fraud, but there are people at home, there are people that have to leave town or have illnesses that come up overnight, so they don't prepare themselves for an absentee ballot. But in the event there's an extenuating circumstance, they should certainly have that available to them.
Marty, the same question to you. Would you introduce or support legislation to allow no-fault absentee voting and to ease the deadlines for returning absentee ballots?
Yes, I would, Andrea. I believe that absentee ballots and no-fault voting needs to be part of the democratic process for elections. And I believe we do need more people voting. You know, the turnouts are lower and lower, and they're making it harder and harder for our good citizens to vote. And I think it's very important that everybody votes, every possible citizen votes, and everyone has their thoughts on their candidates come through their vote. I think it's very important. And pushing legislation through for that would definitely help that.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to add one thing, if I may, please.
Okay.
And I think it's important for all persons elected or seeking elected positions to make their record clear as far as their voting record. Because people that want to be engaged in the process and want to run for political office should have a proven record of being engaged, of paying attention, and of being a regular voter.
Marty, did you have anything?
No?
Okay. I've been doing this, as many of you know, for quite a few years now, and unfortunately, some of the questions that I ask are the same questions that I ask year after year. State representative, state senator, city council, the mayor, I always ask the same questions. And this one is no different, and it pertains to the city of Scranton. Scranton has been designated a distressed city under Pennsylvania's Act 47 since 1992, and we seem to be facing exactly the same challenges now as we did 20 years ago. The recent Supreme Court decision supporting awards to Scranton's firefighters further complicates the matter. What is wrong with Act 47, if anything, and should there be a defined time frame for this designation? And Marty, the question goes to you first.
Andrea, I believe Act 47 in its capacity for the city of Scranton has not worked. You know, things haven't gotten better here. You know, it's a very tough economy, statewide, nationwide, worldwide. And the current plan has not helped us get out of the rut we've had between our police and fire. And I think it's very important that as a state representative that you would work with the mayor and both the police and the fire department in terms of, you know, getting things under control in terms of the awards for the police and the fire for their back pay and such under Act 47 and Act 111. And I believe the court cases now, you know, that's money that's been earned by the police officers and the firefighters, and you know they're waiting on that. And there's a problem with the bank making the city bankrupt by paying it. The money's just not there. And I think that the federal government's going to have to step in, and the state's going to have to step in and help bringing this to a positive conclusion. You know, it hasn't been getting any better. It's only been getting worse.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, the same question to you.
Well, Act 47 has been an abject failure since its implementation here in Scranton since 1992. Over the past 20 years, we have faced a lot of the same problems: declining tax base, nonprofits who don't pay their fair share, and it's unfortunate because we have firefighters, police officers, and we have public servants who are very dedicated to the neighbors and the people that they protect in this community every day. But when you look at Act 47, there's no exit strategy. That has to be changed. There are bills that I've signed onto in the House of Representatives that'll address that. I was at the hearing before the state Supreme Court when they argued about Act 47 and Act 111, because people have to understand they can coexist. Act 111, to bring everyone up to speed, protects police and firemen, those that can't go on strike. It protects them by at least giving them the ability to collectively bargain. So we can't give up rights for people to implement a plan. And when you have the Pennsylvania Economy League, who's made millions of dollars over the past 20 years being a plan coordinator for the city, that have no real financial interest in getting the city out of Act 47, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because there's no incentive for them to be successful and then move on to another town. We've had members of the Pennsylvania Economy League bring their families here, raise their children here, send them off to college. Some even had their children get married. So there's a lot that has to be done in that regard. We're going to try to reform Act 47, but I don't believe it was the recovery plan. I believe it was the stewardship of the recovery plan that led to that enormous court award by the state Supreme Court.
Thank you. Marty, did you have a rebuttal?
Yeah, my opponent voted for Act 47, I believe.
No. I could, if I could have a moment. No, I didn't vote for Act 47. I was still in school when Act 47 became a law. It's been in existence for over a couple decades.
In 2002.
And you may be mistaken, and maybe I can help you out.
Recovery plan, you vote for it.
I voted for a revised recovery plan.
Yeah.
There was originally a recovery plan in the 90s.
That was Act 47.
Okay.
I don't want to have a direct conversation with you. I'm trying to answer Andrea's questions.
Well, it wasn't your turn to rebut
excuse
to
me.
begin with.
Okay, let me,
was.
excuse me one
No, it
second.
wasn't.
Let
It
me
was a
just
double
clarify.
rebut.
Marty, let me clarify this. Act 47 is a state law. What city council votes on is a recovery plan and not Act 47 in and of itself. So that's the clarification on that particular issue. So Kevin, I'll let you finish your thought. Marty, then because I've interrupted, if you want one more minute, then that's it. We're going to move on.
And that's what I wanted to point out, and thank you very much. We voted on a revised recovery plan because at the same time, we wanted to be fair to the police, the fire, the clerical union workers, the DPW union workers. We had serious problems that we faced. My father-in-law was an active duty fireman. A lot of my friends are firemen, police officers, people I love, people I care about. But we have a financial and fiduciary responsibility to make sure we take care of the taxpayer first. There's only so much to go around. I thought I did the right thing in voting to adopt a revised recovery plan because we were not only a distressed city, we were under sanctions by Governor Ridge, who imposed liquid fuel sanctions. We couldn't get our roads, our bridges fixed, our potholes fixed, and we had to do something to prove to the financial markets that Scranton was taking their financial problems seriously and they're going to try to move forward. The problem with the plan came in afterward with the stewardship of the plan when it was implemented in a hypocritical manner.
Marty, I'll give you the last word on that 1 minute.
I'm fine.
Okay. Then let's move on to the question of jobs. And Kevin, the question goes to you first. The 8.9% unemployment rate in the Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Hazleton metropolitan area is the highest of any metropolitan area in the state and above both the national and state rates. We continue to see business closings and even a layoff at Tobyhanna Army Depot. What immediate actions can and will you, as a state legislator, take that will impact unemployment in our region? Kevin, the question to you.
Well, I signed on to a plan by the Democratic Caucus. It's called Jumpstart PA. That program provides for tax incentives to businesses, to hire local people. It provides incentives to small businesses and money to small businesses in the form of loans and grants to use Pennsylvania product, Pennsylvania ingenuity, Pennsylvania ideas, as long as those Pennsylvania businesses are going to sign on and commit to being in Pennsylvania for at least 10 years. So the products that they produce will generate jobs for Pennsylvania. Another thing that we absolutely have to do is commit ourselves to transportation and address the needs of our roads, bridges, and our infrastructure here in Pennsylvania. And for every 1 billion jobs, or $1 billion that you commit to transportation, that creates or keeps 30,000 jobs here in Pennsylvania. So we are committed to bringing jobs to Pennsylvania. But another thing that we have to do is make that strong commitment to education. And I think that message has gotten lost over the past year and a half under the Republican control of the House, the Senate, and this governor. We are not making the appropriate appropriations to basic education, to higher education, to attain a degree, a post-secondary degree, is almost unattainable here in Pennsylvania. And the problem was further exacerbated this year when tuition rates had to go up 20% because of the reductions in appropriations to higher education. And as I mentioned earlier, our children are falling behind. Preschool programs are being jeopardized. All-day kindergarten programs are being jeopardized, and at the expense of our future. Because if we don't have a well-educated workforce, we're not going to have the companies and the industry come here because we don't have qualified people. So we have to make a higher education and at least a great quality basic education affordable to the children here of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Marty, the question goes to you.
Andrea, all across Pennsylvania, Pennsylvanians are struggling to make ends meet. You know, government bureaucrats cannot make sustainable jobs. Whatever they're doing isn't working. Small businesses drive our district. Small businesses are the key to our economy. I support tax cuts for small businesses and increased SBA loan amounts to get new community businesses off the ground. I also support Keystone Employment and Training Tax Credit and small business incubators that pumps about $20 million for infusion into the Commonwealth Financing Authority. It's funding for early stage startup for small business companies. And I also feel that we need to go green. You know, through 2011, there were over 6,700 green-related jobs that were created, and also 600 solar-related businesses that were cut by the current administration. I think we also need to renew the solar energy tax break. And I think these are key steps in getting our economy back on track in the district.
Thank you.
Andrea, if I may?
Okay.
There's just one thing I'd like to add. Everyone is aware or has at least heard of Marcellus Shale in the gas industry here in Pennsylvania. Whether people are for it, whether they're against it, it's here to stay. They're not going to leave because there's a fair severance tax imposed on them. They fully expect to pay a fair severance tax. A lot of that money, and I voted for severance tax of over 8% and over 7% on the House floor in 2009 and 2010. To bring money in for infrastructure, to repair our roads and bridges. It's important, but it's also important to let the industry know that we have a qualified workforce already. All of our tradesmen, they all have journeyman and apprenticeship programs. They're already ready. Our community colleges and our trade schools have qualified people here in Pennsylvania that are on the job ready right now. They don't need to be trained, they need to be hired.
Okay, thank you. Marty, anything else that you wanted to add?
No.
Okay. I want to, actually, Kevin had started talking about Marcellus Shale, which is a great segue into my next question, which pertains to Marcellus Shale and to the environment. Marty, you'll respond to this question first. Given the opportunities and the dangers that are inherent in natural gas drilling from Marcellus Shale, how will you go about making decisions that will provide maximum protection to the environment and public health while capitalizing on the economic potential of this natural resource? What specific actions as a legislator can you take?
Andrew, I believe intense regulation is the key there. I think it's needed so in 30 years we're not looking back saying what happened to our environment, like what happened with the coal industry. I believe that, you know, our roads and bridges are being destroyed by this industry, and I believe our best bet is to regulate it to the hilt and to tax it properly. You know, like 2.6% is not cutting the bill for what is going on and what is happening to our environment, our roads, our bridges, and our environment.
Kevin, the question to you.
I think one of the things we have to do is we have to have a 24-hour watch over a 24-hour business. This governor and this administration is continually reducing funds to the Department of Environmental Protection, and it's not right. So we have fewer and fewer people keeping their eye on the ball when it comes to our environment. That's one thing that has to be changed. If they're going to extract natural gas here in Pennsylvania, 24 hours, 7 days a week, we should have people watching them 24 hours, 7 days a week. Another thing that we have to do is make sure that they have significantly increased performance bonds in the event there's an environmental disaster. If they taint a whole community's drinking water, if they poison a stream, they have to be held accountable. And the only way that they're going to be held accountable and that the people of Pennsylvania can understand that their best interests are being protected is if they have secured funds in those bonds in place for when an environmental disaster happens. Accidents happen, they're going to happen. But it shouldn't be at the expense of the Pennsylvania taxpayer. The incident that we had up in Dimick with Cabot Oil, that was a serious problem. People had their drinking water tainted, and they suffered. And as a result, Pennsylvanians had to pick up the tab, and they had to pay to make sure that they had adequate drinking water and to make sure that those families are protected. Because that's one thing that we have under our state constitution. Everybody has a right to safe drinking water. But it shouldn't come out of the taxpayers' pockets. It should come out of the gas and oil companies' pockets. And I think a lot of people would feel a lot more secure here in Pennsylvania if there were Pennsylvanians working, because they have their children, they have their grandchildren, and they have their families to raise here. So they're going to keep a more watchful eye on what's going on with regards to the environment. Thank you.
Marty, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, Andrea, I feel that the power of the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, has been diverted more to the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, and has really limited the power of the DEP right now in the Marcellus Shale industry. And I believe that that's happened because of our current governor and his policies. And I believe that you need to be a voice. You know, we have a minority. The Democrats have a minority seat. We're minority in the House, in the Senate, and the governor's Republican. We need to speak loudly and yell on the top of fences and rooftops about what's going on if we want to convert everybody over to the Democratic side of things. And I think we as good Democrats need to do so, because just voting, we're not going to come on top here. We need to get people on our side, Andrea.
Kevin, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just like to say I agree with my opponent in that regard, and that's why I've attended many rallies and many public appearances to address environmental pollution with regards to Marcellus Shale and the gas industry. One of the biggest problems that we have in Pennsylvania, and I want the people of the 113th District to understand it, is that they have what they call expedited permits that take less than 7 days for someone to get a permit to drill for natural gas. It takes longer to get a driver's license or a learner's permit here in Pennsylvania than it does an expedited permit to drill for natural gas, and it's just not right.
Thank you. And I've been told that I haven't been paying close enough attention to my time, and I'm out of time for questions this evening. So with that, we are going to be moving on to closing statements. And again, we drew straws prior to the start of this event. And Kevin, you were chosen to give the first closing statement. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for having us here, for having this forum. I'd like to thank the University of Scranton for providing us with this great venue. I'd like to thank all of you for coming here and for those watching at home. But this campaign and this re-election is about achievement, and it's about accomplishment. We've been very successful in spearheading legislation down in Harrisburg that substantively affects the people that we represent. We've had 13 pieces of legislation passed in the General Assembly since 2008, and House Bill 797, for example. This is an example of working in a cooperative manner with Republicans on the other side of the aisle. I had former House Bill 1231 in the 2009-2010 session. Got through the House, got through the Senate. That bill was a cancer presumption bill for firefighters, to protect them, to protect the people that protect us. It wasn't passed. It was vetoed by Governor Rendell. A good friend of mine, Representative Ferry, he picked up the ball. He said, you run with it. You're in the majority in the House and the Senate. You have a Republican governor who's agreed to sign the bill. He ran with it, went through the House. The Senate was ultimately signed by the governor. We have House Bill 91, Megan's Law loophole, to make sure that out-of-state perpetrators of sexual assaults, when they move to Pennsylvania, they now have to register and they have to report in. We also have Zachary's Law. We passed this bill only last month. House Bill 601 was originally brought to my attention by Chrissy McLaughlin, the mother of Zachary, whose 14-month-old boy Zachary was assaulted by her live-in boyfriend. He was punched in the stomach, his bowel was dislodged, and he ended up dying a few days later. The bereaved mother came in, talked to me and my staff, and it took a while, but working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, we had Zachary's Law pass the House, and it's over in the Senate right now, and that protects our children from child abusers and those child abusers whose actions result in the death of a child.
Thank you, Kevin.
Very proud of that.
Thank you. Marty, your closing statement.
I just want to close by saying that I gave up a good-paying job to run for this office, and I believe that I'm a viable candidate and I am the right man for this job through my integrity, my honesty, and what I'm about. This position is about sacrifice, and it's about getting things done. I'm not out to be a vote. I'm out to be a vote and a voice, and that's what I'm about.
Thank you. How about a round of applause for both of our candidates this evening? I want to thank you both for your commitment to democracy, both for serving and for running. It's not an easy thing to run for political office, so thank you very much for your commitment to all of us. And with that, that concludes our debate for the 113th Legislative District. I apologize again for the incorrect slide that had a mind of its own this evening. Again, we invite you to join the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County if you're interested in working on things that help to make the election process better. We do need your support, and if you're so inclined, make a financial contribution on the way out. And don't forget to vote on April 24th. Thank you.